Thanks for doing that. Great to have you all here. Real quickly, I'd love for each of you to just briefly introduce yourself and what organization you work with, just because it might set the stage for this conversation, because we wanted to have folks with just different backgrounds. Jody, since you're in the upper left of my screen, why don't you start?
Of course. Hi, I'm Jody Tracey. Nice to meet everybody. I am CHRO for a tech startup called Two Sigma Insurance Quantified. And we are building insurance technologies as an insurtech.
Thanks, Jody. Keagan, you are next on my Brady Bunch screen.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Yeah, so my name is Keagan Russo. I'm the president of North America Local Fleet and Fuel Man at FleetCor. FleetCor is a company that looks to make the payments world easier for businesses. And Fuel Man in North America Local is one of the larger kind of original lines of business of FleetCor.
Thanks, Keagan. And Brian, last but certainly not least.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Welcome, everybody. Great to be here. I'm Brian Wallace, founder and president of Now Sourcing, where we make the world's ideas simple, visual, and influential through content marketing and infographics. And we just celebrated our 15th year, so we're past our awkward teenage years. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much, Brian. So Jody, we'll start with you. What first got you interested in micro-internships? How did you hear about them, and sort of what piqued your interest, just to set the stage?
Well, probably like every other panelist, I have been doing internship programs for a long time. Probably 30-ish years doing internship programs that are very heavy. They are, we are looking for our future generation of employees, and we are testing them through these internships. So we're very careful about who we go out and look at for the experience that they have, and make some decisions on hiring afterwards. This is different. I learned about it from one of my nieces who had been offered internships unpaid, and she needed to pay some bills. And so she had done some micro-internships and compared them to the traditional internships for me, and said, since the micro-internship is a discrete project, that she had responsibility for delivering this work, that she actually found she learned more from that than she did from these internships that were, as she described them, beauty contests for who was going to get hired. So that's how I first heard about micro-internships, was her experience.
I didn't know that. That's interesting. It just as a follow-up, I mean, when you think about these projects, and this will get into the myths later, I mean, you're not thinking about this as a replacement for your summer internship program, though, are you?
So, truthfully, we have not been doing our summer internship program, and we've only been doing the micro-internships lately. We do find that they do a good job of telling us if the people are good for hires. And they are far less heavy than our traditional internship programs. And now that I'm working for a startup rather than a large, Fortune 500 company, it's much easier to do micro-internships than it is to do a full internship program.
No, that's interesting. I mean, that's actually a good, I guess, segue to Keagan. I mean, Keagan, you do work for a Fortune 500 company. I mean, for folks that don't know FleetCor, it's a massive New York Stock Exchange traded company. How did you first get interested in the micro-internships, and how are you thinking about them?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear what Jody said there, because I first heard about micro-internships with Parker Dewey when I was a chief strategy officer at Atlanta fintech startup. And my CEO introduced me to you and Parker Dewey, a handful of years ago now, and I was working on kind of 5-year strategic plan and new vertical go-to-market effort. And, it was, I was in a new C-level role, but it was still a sole contributor, and we were really lean. So I had a lot of research and data work that I needed to do that, we just didn't have hands to help with. And a lot of it was publicly available information, kind of pulling from like the UN and the World Bank and, all sorts of fun places like that. And so he recommended that I get in touch with Parker Dewey, and we set something up, and the project went a lot quicker after that, and it turned out to be a success. And since I left that role, I've worked at a couple of different places, and in each, I found a place and time to reach back out and say, this really worked for me here. There's no reason why it wouldn't work for me, now that I'm at FleetCor. Regardless of the size of the company, if there are discrete tasks that I need to get done quickly, and I don't have the ability to kind of pull one of my full-time resources off of it, or it's not the summer and there's no available summer interns, it's been a wonderful resource. So much so that, I think the organization, at least in the North America Fuel Group, is starting to consider micro-internships more and more.
And again, if I remember correctly, some of the micro-interns you've worked with actually did convert to traditional summer interns and even full-time hires. So you're not viewing it as a replacement, but very much as a complement.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
And then Brian, again, certainly last but not least, I mean, how did you first hear about these and get interested in them, and how are you using them? And then we'll jump into some of the myths.
Sure, Jeff. So it's interesting. I actually just saw it in a email newsletter or just some kind of email reach out from one of the local universities. And I feel like a lot of the traditional internship cycle has not kept up with the times in quite a while anyway, because I feel like every region of the country, every school kind of stresses different things that there's a natural depth and range in. So some might have prestigious design programs, some might be more into tech or project management, whatever it is. I feel like you're kind of in a spot where it doesn't matter how big a company you are, you're not going to be at every university simultaneously at every job fair and every opportunity. And until recently, I feel like a lot of them would have a combination of different systems. So you would have to maintain all of these different listings, make sure that they were current. People would randomly call you up and things would be out of date. And I mean, if your office moved or if you had a different hiring manager, it was always just this giant scrambled mess.
Yeah.
And it was very frustrating to me. It was nice that over the years, I saw that more and more universities started to get on the same page onto the same system. But even then, you would still have to maintain it and list separate postings and make sure everything was running. And I feel like I just said, it was not a nimble system. And the amount of time that you could invest in someone for an internship, how many internships are you going to have in the summer? So let's say you have 1, 2, 3, 5, 100, right? Every person who it's not a good fit for either side of the equation, they're basically taking the slot of somebody else. So this, I feel like, just allows everybody to be a little bit more honest and on the same page and fast. I'm sure everybody who's on the webinar has heard of LinkedIn. Reid Hoffman, one of the co-founders of LinkedIn, is pretty well known for talking about how he views the nature and function of work as a function of how teams interact with each other. And he borrows a military phrase as a tour of duty. So what I like about that mindset isn't, we're just gonna have you be a cog in a wheel and we'll figure out something to do for you for a few months and maybe we'll pay you and maybe we won't. And a lot of times, I think Jody's pretty fond of saying this, it's kind of a tryout sort of a thing, like for the beauty contest of getting a job.
Yeah.
But if we truly are trying to have internships, why are we not empowering the interns to achieve meaningful work? And when you have a micro internship, you really can achieve some great things together. And I've found we did away with the traditional internship. And also during the pandemic, we actually got rid of our offices. So we're 100% distributed now anyway. So this actually fits even better with the way, the nature and style that we're working with. And yeah, we could either just hire people directly. And sometimes we also have people do repeat micro-internship tasks. So we found it to be tremendously beneficial and much more nimble.
Well, and you're hitting one of the myths. So as we're jumping into the myths themselves, I mean, one of the myths is, like, we don't have time for this, or our hiring managers don't have time to manage a micro intern, or they don't have these types of project needs. I mean, you're the CEO of a company. Did you feel like working with a micro intern sort of took time from you, or took too much time, or did it actually give time back?
So I would say anybody that would say that to us doesn't understand what we're talking about, because I think in the public consciousness, micro-internship, that's not just in everybody's lexicon. Even if you talk to major HR.
Not yet,
but we're going to fix that, right? So, obviously Parker Dewey is going to own that dictionary definition, but it's not a well-known thing by everybody yet. So I would argue it's the exact opposite. You don't have time. If you think you don't have time to do a micro-intern, you actually don't have time to do an internship, or we might as well call them macro-internships. I think it's a systemic failure on the organization if they can't handle this, because it just means that they have not put assignments into clearly defined, repeatable processes, right? So it's more of an organizational flow issue. It has not, once we've figured out what we want people to do and how to manage it, because obviously there's growing pains, and if it's a brand new system and a way of style of doing work, yeah, I mean, we weren't perfect at the beginning, and we could talk about a funny thing that happened at the beginning too in a minute, but I think it's more on the onus of the organization to learn how to give meaningful steps of work that can be assigned as micro-internships.
So Jody, I mean, as an HR leader, when you were sharing this with your colleagues, what were you hearing from them? Like the hiring managers, for lack of a better term?
My hiring managers were actually really supportive. We are an agile organization, and so they are willing to experiment. And this was an experiment to them, and they were perfectly willing to do that experiment. In fact, it was an experiment process, but it was also the project we chose was an experiment that they wanted to do. But we didn't have any resources to do it. And so this allowed us to have resources to do that. So I didn't hear resistance. We were actually doing a recruiting project with the interns. And when we hired somebody from the recruiting project, or hired somebody that one of the interns found for us, everybody was cheering. Like, they were thrilled.
That's awesome.
That the work that these interns did and the experiment that they were doing actually was paying off. So I did not have resistance, but it's a cultural thing that we have a culture of experimentation that I didn't have the resistance. I did have some other problems like security, and can we give them an email, and what does it require to give them an email, and some of those things we had to work out.
Yeah.
And how to do that for a short time frame, and what the line was. So I had more process things that I needed to work out than I did having true resistance to the problem.
And that does, I mean, that comes up. I mean, fortunately, all of the micro interns were under NDA to begin with. And I assume most of the projects they were doing, they didn't have access to your systems anyway, or didn't even need a corporate email. Did that help overcome some of those?
So because I was having them do a recruiting project, I needed them to have access to our LinkedIn. And so I did have to give them an email.
Oh, for the LinkedIn, got it.
Yeah, if I didn't, it would have been much easier, because they use their own computers. They depending on what the project is, you don't actually need to give them access to most systems. So,
and we know, and again, from conversations you and I have had in the past, we know how seriously y'all take security and information security. So there were still projects that.
Yeah, we since we are an insurtech, our data and our systems are actually connected to people and businesses, private data. So we take security to the nth degree. But yeah, we were able to overcome this problem and make sure that they were able to get access to an email.
And that hits, again, one of those myths that comes up is it's not usable in fintech or insurance tech, and everything we have is sensitive and highly, well, yet there's still projects that come up, like some of the recruiting work or marketing or whatnot that can be done outside of that. But you're also bringing up something else. I mean, one of the things we'll hear from some of the HR departments, one of those myths goes back to, again, my hiring managers aren't going to use this. They're too busy. It sounds like work for them. I mean, Brian, Jody, you both hit that, but Keagan, as a hiring manager in a big company that has an HR department that may have felt that way, I mean, did you feel like this made your life easier or harder?
I think going into it, I was worried that it was gonna make it harder. Right? Like, what was I going to be required to do? If it's for such a short project, how do I get folks up to speed quickly enough so that they can actually make an impact and deliver real value with the time that's kind of left over? And I actually have not found that to be the case. So again, like the first handful of projects that I did with Parker Dewey, I tried to keep them in a pretty tight box, right? They didn't need access to internal data. They didn't need IT support internally. I could give them work that was kind of more research based and didn't require deep knowledge about, our business model and things like that. And there are plenty of ways to kind of compartmentalize major projects and pull out those components that can be kind of attacked by a handful of micro interns, right? So, if you take a little time up front to do that compartmentalization of the work, I think it's always, it can be pretty easy to find those places where some of those HR related concerns are not really an issue. I think lately what I did on the most recent project was a little bit different, where I did think it was important that the micro interns learned a little bit more about the business and come up to speed, and realizing that, having done this enough, that you're not always the end product isn't always going to be the same, right? There are different competencies, skill levels, and amount of effort that interns put in, right? And that's just a reality. It's a reality for a full-time employee that you hire as well. We did kind of like a bake-off, right? Where I think we brought on, we tried to bring on 4 micro interns at first, and I gave them a pretty wide scope and said, go out and build me a social media campaign that I can use for the summer months. And here's my brand. Here's some resources for you to go read up on it. Here's what my customers look like. Like, come back in 4 weeks and tell me what my social media strategy should be, and lay out, maybe the first 2 weeks of that campaign. And, if you do a great job, we'll bring you back on to actually build out the entire campaign. And that worked really, really well for us too, because, we kind of let them put in as much as they could afford to, and come back, and we were able to take all of the work, kind of find the best parts of it. And we actually found a woman who was she did such a fantastic job, that we brought her on as a full-time summer intern, and she's been a contractor for us while she finishes her degree.
Wow. I mean, Jody, you talked about beauty contests before. When Keagan gives that example, I mean, how do you think about that relative to beauty contests, but also as you think about recruiting for full-time roles?
So it's interesting. I did a project this summer with 3 interns and gave them all essentially the same assignment. And it was interesting to see the quality across the three and how people thought about it. They all actually did a great job. One thought about it different, thought about the project in a unique and different way, and was able to move beyond my direction into a different direction that was innovative, and really, really positive, really had great results. So, and he is still doing different work for us. We actually have him as a contractor. And if he was interested in recruiting, I would hire him, but he's actually an engineering student. So there is that was kind of a beauty contest element to it, but I didn't intend it to be.
But it's in a good way. It's not beauty contest based upon what your GPA is or where you went to school or your major, but let's give 3 kids or 3 micro interns a chance and see which one might be the best fit for our organization.
Right, and understand these types of problems that we're trying to solve in a.
Yeah,
yes,
we've seen a lot of that. I mean, one of the organizations we work with actually called it American Idol, where we're going to start with 10 and we know that we're looking for ultimately 5 full-time hires, or we're going to start with 100 with the goal of finding 50 of our summer interns for next year. And I think this goes back to something Brian said before. This gave them a chance to almost mutually audition before committing to that longer term summer internship or full-time role. Let's make sure we're not wasting that slot for the summer intern for someone who's going to figure out the week 1, I'm not interested in insurance tech or not interested in fintech or anything else. Brian, as sort of running a very, very lean organization as well, I mean, what did you find the onboarding process like? Because again, a myth is, is the view worth the climb? Is it going to take too long to onboard or train to really get the value out of the micro intern?
I think because it is such a nimble process, if you know that mutually you're agreeing to do a finite amount of tasks, and if you are smart, you'll say this should take about this much time and this is how much it needs to be. So it shouldn't be something that's such a surprise. So I think part of it is the initial responsiveness, right? So if I'm messaging somebody and they can't get back to me at all, well, that's kind of a red flag right there. Or sometimes they might talk a good game at the beginning of it, and then when it's time to start the project, I feel like some people, and this could be applying for jobs too, a lot of people will just spray and pray, right? And I would imagine that micro interns are no different. So I think there are probably some people in the system, and it comes down to the individual, not the overall system, where you could just have somebody that overcommits, says yes to 100 micro internships, and then they ghost everybody and could be playing the game. I would imagine that you probably have some controls against that, but we've had some people that are hit and miss, right? This isn't just a micro internships or just the magic bullet or something. It just comes down to the types and personalities and overcommitments. Sometimes people get into it. They thought that they could do it really fast and they didn't realize how taxing that would be along with everything else they have to do in life. They might have family emergencies. I mean, if you think about the time period that we've been talking about this while we're all in lockdowns and stuff, right? So yeah, I mean, you just have to be cognizant of all of that.
Yep. Yeah, and just as an aside, I mean, we found that of all of the thousands and thousands of these projects that have been completed, it's less than 2% of them have issues, where a student, again, isn't able to complete it on time or something else happens. And part of what we found is that for the employers, we're hearing, gosh, this student who I thought was going to be amazing, had a great resume, great GPA, went to the same school as me, and that's why I picked that individual. And by the way, may have actually offered the summer internship or full-time role. It's a great way to tease those things out before committing to the summer internship or full-time role, which is really, again, pretty effective.
Right. This finally gives us an opportunity to stay away from that bias, because a lot of people will just hire people. Oh, you went to this school? I went there too. Free pass, you're in. And it's like, wait, that doesn't mean that somebody's good. That doesn't mean that they're going to work hard. There's a lot more that I look at on the individual level, that if you are not used to overcoming that bias, you are completely leaving a ton of people off the table that will probably work harder because they have something to prove. And
Yeah.
And hey, do you mind if I jump in there, Jeff?
No, please. I'd rather you guys do all the talking. I'd rather just not say anything.
So I want to respond to that, because I think my experience with Parker Dewey is interesting to your point, Brian, where so before I worked at the startup I mentioned, I was a consultant with McKinsey & Company, and I went to a small liberal arts college in Maine. And I think that I was one of maybe 3 alumni from that school that kind of was in the McKinsey alumni network. And, it always kind of bugged me because, it's a good school, and, a lot of really, I'm biased, but smart, hardworking folks kind of went through it. And, it just was never on the radar of any of the big, investment banks or consulting firms in terms of kind of on-campus recruiting. So one of the things that I wanted to try to accomplish working with Parker Dewey was to be able to expose some of the kids from my admittedly privileged New England prep school.
You can say Colby.
Yeah, I went to Colby College.
Yeah.
A chance to work in fintech. Right. And, when I grew up in Maine, and, I thought like there's like 3 jobs. You can be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, or you can own a shop locally. Right. That's like kind of what everyone did growing up. I didn't even know what a consultant was until I graduated. Until some of my friends were applying for consulting jobs my senior year of college. Right. I didn't realize it was a career. So, I was like, hey, I'm going to actually, make this an opportunity to give back to my school. And that was great for a couple of reasons, because I developed a relationship with the career services office, where we were able to give feedback on the kids, for the folks who were applying for internships, and like what was working and what wasn't working, so that there was actual dialogue where they would be able to improve whenever they were going out to apply for full-time internships or full-time jobs. So I think that was really a good benefit. And then over time, I actually realized that, hey, Colby actually does pretty well, all things considered, in the grand scheme of things when it comes to recruiting. And so I've tried to always make sure, if I'm doing multiple micro interns, I try to split it at least 50-50 or 25-75, and I'll try to find someone from Colby to give an internship to. But I realized just what you said, right? Like, just because they went to the same school as me and have a similar background, like that's all well and good. But there are so many folks out there that just don't get the opportunity that a kid from Colby does to experience what it's like to work in, whether it's a fintech company or a Fortune 500 company or a startup, right? Like, and they're working just as hard and they can be just as smart, and they need the opportunity to experience what it's like to work at these companies too, so that they can be more successful when they come out.
And that's one of the things that's interesting, is I love the fact that you're using this as a way to give back to your alma mater. But to your point, I mean, I know some of the projects you've done and FleetCorp done, you're specifically focusing on students from HBCUs or from underrepresented backgrounds to create those equitable pathways and exposure to an industry or a company that they may not have heard of before or may not have otherwise had access to. But one other thing I want to hit on, though, because Colby is a liberal arts program where the majors don't sound like job titles. Again, to a myth that comes up, like, do you feel like the students are prepared? I mean, whether they're a philosophy major or a finance major from a business program, have you felt like the students were prepared to work on these?
Oh, 100%. And Jody said something earlier that I've experienced as well, where some of the experience with the liberal arts micro interns is they might attack a problem in a different way than I would have done so, right? And it often leads to a better outcome, right? If you have someone kind of go after and try to solve the problem that is laid out in front of them in kind of a more traditional, business school approach versus someone who has a different style. Marrying those two together usually produces a better outcome, I found. And I haven't seen the liberal arts background as a deterrent. If anything, they have a tendency to, I think, be a little bit more resourceful in trying to figure out how to solve the problem in different ways.
That's great. And Jody, I mean, knowing a little bit about your organization, I mean, historically, just really, really smart people working there, great backgrounds, great schools. Have you found that the hiring managers are open to working with students from different backgrounds and schools and GPAs and majors because it's only a short-term project? And is this helping almost retrain them to look beyond academic pedigree?
So our managers, so we do tend to hire Ivy League, MIT type engineers and people. Our managers believe we should be breaking out of that mold. And part of this experiment was, can we break out of that mold and find people who can solve problems differently and contribute just as well as their Ivy League cohorts. So that was part of the experiment. They did want to broaden the schools that we reached out to, and it was part of proving something for them, which I think we did.
Well, and that's great to hear. And again, it comes back to the mission of why we founded this is, can you actually use these projects to almost retrain some of the hiring managers that you don't need to be just a 3.9 finance major from a certain school to do a role, and letting them actually experience individuals from different backgrounds. We got a question here in the chat came to us. With so many career services folks on the call today, can you share some of the advice that you would give to the career services folks to share with their students on how you go about picking an applicant? And that also goes back to a myth is, well, is this really hard to select an applicant? Am I going to be spending hours and hours interviewing and phone screening and flipping through resume books for a project that would take me 5 or 10 hours to do myself? So Brian, I guess we'll start with you first. Again, one, what's the process like to actually select someone? Is it difficult? And two, what advice would you give to the students out there who are applying for projects?
Yeah, so I take a keen focus into who is paying attention. So we have a whole list of questions that goes with every micro-internship out there. So what your GPA is, maybe you were taking care of your parents or something. I don't know. There's a million reasons why somebody might not have a good GPA. Maybe they are dyslexic. Maybe there's like some learning difference. I think that people who are often overlooked are willing to work harder to prove that they can do it. And I think a lot of people who are in the presumed positions of power might get a little smug and complacent. But either side could prove that wrong. But back to your thing. Here, I'll even cheat a little bit. Anybody that walks into the organization, micro-internship, internship, full-time hire, I ask everybody, and so does the team, we say, why do you want to work here? There's a million other places you can work, first. And then second, we say, tell us anything about what we do. And if people can't answer those two questions, the second they walk in the door, whether it's a micro-internship, internship, full-time, part-time, anything, they're probably just looking for the next job because they were just applying to everything. So I think when you can see that people are paying attention, it shows the level of precision that they're willing to work for you. Go ahead.
But it's a 5-hour project or 10-hour project. How much effort are you going to spend to see if they're really paying attention?
Well, I didn't say that they have to do like 5 hours of research, but imagine that there's a person, maybe the 2% that you talked about before, that they just apply to 100 random gigs, right? I think they're not going to do that great a job, as opposed to somebody who says, hey, there's this huge basket of opportunity on Parker Dewey or maybe other things, and this is the one that I really want. I think that the people who truly take interest in the work would do really well and precise on the assignment, would be a great position to rehire or hire directly for the organization.
Well, and I probably wasn't asking my question well, whether I was actually flipping it and saying, you are going to be selecting someone to do a project that might take you only 5 hours to do. Do you find that the platform sort of takes too much time for you to assess the different candidates to make it worth your time to tease those things out? Did that question make sense?
Yeah.
I see Keagan shaking his head though.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. So what I like about the platform is, rather than going on campus and doing one specific career fair, I'm not going to say I'm going to get the exact person, but I feel like if you go to University X, you're probably only going to get a short variety of archetypes of people that like to go to that school, because a lot of people might be local to that university and they might specialize in different careers and all that thing. But here, when we first put our first piece up there, I was amazed. There were a ton of places, and I like to think that I know a lot of different colleges, tons of places I'd never even heard of. So, I mean, the whole map lit up, and I said, wow, look at all of this diversity, all of these different thoughts, all these different processes, people answering the questions differently. I feel like once a ton of them started pouring in and we were evaluating them, it was almost difficult to, once we kind of had some of our favorites, as more came in, to evaluate some of the next batch of it. So sometimes we actually had to turn off some of the opportunities.
Keagan, you look like you're chomping at the bit here.
Always. Well, I love talking about this. So whenever we do a project, I try to do kind of 3 or more spots for it, because I mean, we have a little bit of a budget and it's not that expensive, right, to bring on micro interns, especially if you scope it well. So, you know, we have the opportunity to open it up to a bunch of people. And what I usually do is, you know, I'll put a few questions that I want them to answer, where, you know, to Brian's point, maybe I want them to tell me a little bit about, you know, hey, in this project description, I mentioned kind of these 3 things. Kind of tell me a time when you have experience with something related to that, and you know, I'll ask them, you know, why they think it would be interesting to work at FleetCor, and then I might ask it one other question that's a little bit of like a wild card, but more to see how much effort they'll put into individualizing the response. And you go in there and I'll usually say, hey, all right, if I have 3 slots, I'll pick up the phone and I want to talk to 6 people. And out of the 6 people, 2 or 3 of them, you know, I'll talk to Colby students, mainly because I like hearing what's going on campus. You know, so I enjoy that, right? I always look forward to it. And then the 3 or 4 other spots, I'm going to try to reserve for 2 for like the candidate that comes through that blows me away, and 2 for like just kind of wild card, non-traditional. I would, you know, normally never look at this candidate because, you know, maybe they're a creative writing major and they are, you know, have experience illustrating and it's a data project, but I want to like find out why they are interested in doing this work, and you know, whether they can do it and how they would approach the problem. And then I'll look through, so I kind of like get a pool, and then I'll look through and it's really clear. I would say like half the time the candidates are copy and pasting something from a Microsoft Word document they probably have on the side that they paste into every and then the other half are a mix of, you know, they put some time and thought into it and did a nice job. And then there's a handful that are like, you know, they clearly took their time and they were interested in this specific posting because no one in the world would have enough time to answer the way they did for all the different postings that are on there. And so it filters very quickly for me, as I don't like spend a lot of time reading through every single one of them. And I always find a handful.
It's probably like less. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. I'm good.
No, I was going to say it probably takes less time to see that answer even than flipping through a resume.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, Jody, I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, Keagan talked about how he actually hops on the phone with some of them before selecting. I don't know, did you do that with any of the ones, or did you just pick? What was your thought on that process?
So we just picked from the answers, but I will agree that we did really go through, we were thoughtful about the questions we asked and how people answered those questions. Their interest in the assignment and the company, that it comes through in those questions. So my advice to the career services people giving advice to the kids, tell them to be really thoughtful about the answer. Take the time, look at the company website, look at what the job is and what the requirements are, and then write your answers. Don't just launch into answers or cut and paste. Be thoughtful about it.
And we have, I mean, I think all three of you have seen this. I mean, we've put together a number of templates for probably a couple hundred of the most popular projects. So you need content creation. Here's a template pre-scoped out. And we even have suggested questions there. How would you approach this in 3 sentences or less? Write something that's tweet length about why this interest, and we found those things really do stand out. The other thing it does is, look, every student's resume should be perfect at this point and not have typos or grammatical errors, because career services teams spend so much time. Again, should be, we still always surprised. What we found is some of these short answer questions let you tease out those other things. One, how interested they are in the company, but do they have attention to detail? How are their communication skills, et cetera? We have about 13 minutes left. Another question I want to get to, and I want to make sure we're hitting enough of the question or the questions coming from the audience. One of the myths is, does a 10 or 20 hour project really provide enough insights for you to get to know the student, to decide, hey, is this someone we potentially want to recruit for a full-time role or a summer internship? Not that they're just going to do one project and you're going to make a job offer, although we've heard that happen, but does that really give you enough insights? And Jody, again, we'll start with you.
So it does. If you're really looking for a hire, think about how you're structuring the project, how long you want it to be for, how open-ended it is, what you're testing for, and you're designing the project around it. Then you're putting together the criteria that you're looking for as they are doing the assignment. Are you looking for them to ask a lot of questions? And so then you're going to be a little vaguer on what your goals are to see if they will ask the right questions. If you want them to be able to be very independent, then you are designing your project so that they can be very independent. So as a person putting a project out on a site like Parker Dewey, you want to make sure that you are constructing your project and your criteria for evaluating someone based on what you're looking for.
That's helpful. Keagan.
Yeah, I mean, let me flip it, right? Like, how much more information are you getting about how a candidate is going to perform by having them do 10 to 20 hours of work rather than just having them meet 6 to 8 people for 45 minutes to an hour? Right? I mean, it's orders of magnitude more information about how successful this candidate is likely to be in your organization by getting them in and throwing them some work and seeing what happens. Right. So,
and it's work you don't want to do anyway.
Work I really need someone to do and may not have the time to do. Yeah. But right, it's just, it de-risks the whole hiring process in my opinion, right? There's still like there's still folks who, may look great in 10 to 20 hours. And when they come in the door,
Keagan, I lost you there.
Oh,
Can other people hear Keagan?
No. I think you might be breaking out, but it could be me. I'm running low on battery here. So, but yeah, no, I think it changes the risk profile of the hiring process in a really positive way.
And that was me who went out, not you. So sorry about that.
That's all right.
My headset. Brian, what are your thoughts? I mean, you also do a ton of research in this space, sort of with your day job. I mean, is a 5 or 10 hour project enough to get valuable insights?
I think so. I could tell you 5 minutes in on an interview if I think somebody's going to work out. I could be wrong and the person could be a sociopath. But I think once you get really good at studying how people answer, their body language, micro expressions, I mean, if you really go to like the very advanced ways of not interrogation, but actually evaluating how people are, that's one side of the equation. But that's more of an initial impression sort of thing, because somebody might be good in that moment, but somebody doing a project at that moment might not have the time, desire, and availability. Maybe they thought it was okay and it was worth, a couple of bucks to do that. That doesn't mean that they necessarily want to do it for the long haul. So I think it's an entirely different equation if that moves from a distinct short project of 5, 10, 15, 20 hours to, is this person wanting to do the same kind of work with a growth trajectory over years of time, right? So I would say, kind of twisting that a little bit, maybe it's advisable for people, if you want to get to understand the micro-intern a little better, you can always schedule time with them and you can repeat projects. So I think it gives you a great idea of their work ethic, but I think I like to see, I'm a very long-term strategic thinker, although I talked all about this agility and all of that. I like to see how people want to perform in the long term. I mean, there's people that have been with us for a really long time, or people that were here in the past and haven't been here for a while that I still keep up with constantly. And I think that people enjoy that, right? I think how you portray your organization inside and out brings that level of loyalty to it. So kind of like the tour of duty thing, were they just some special ops that came in for this one little journey? Really somebody that wants to go into campaign after campaign. So you can always get to know them better through a couple of calls or through some repeat work.
So 2 other quick questions that just came in that we should have time for. One was, is this hard? Is this difficult to handle the payment processing? Or, and again, I have my own views about the way we structured Parker Dewey, but again, we'll start with Keagan this time. Keagan, was it hard? Did you have to deal with W-2s and 1099s and how to pay the students and all that other stuff?
I found it very easy. Right. So the alternative where it's not kind of managed through the platform and I have to do a lot of that work myself, especially if I wanted to hire multiple micro-interns at the same time, is much more onerous than what we've had with Purdue, which I think makes it very, very simple. And I don't know, there's the kind of like funny story where we wanted to actually convert a micro-intern to like a full-time summer intern and give her a FleetCorps email address and everything. And, our HR department hadn't been involved when we brought them on and came in and we're like, okay, well, what do we need to do this? How much do we have to pay Parker Dewey? I'm like, no, we don't have to do that. And she's like, yeah, no, I'm going to have to get a note from the leadership team at Parker Dewey to verify that what you're telling me about how this platform works is actually true. So Larry Jeffrey sent an email to my HR business partner and said, no, we're a mission-driven organization, and this is the kind of outcomes we want to get for our students. Believe it. It's pretty easy.
You needed the doctor's note. I love it.
All right. I was pretty frustrated, but thank you for getting back to us so quickly.
No, but and that's again by design, that when you're using this, and Jody, I know we talked about this early on, there's no like 1099s, you're not paying the student directly. I mean, was it simple?
It could not have been easier. As the question was asked, sorry, got a dog barking in the background. as the question was asked, I was trying to think, is there a way that it could have been easier? And I can't think of a way it could have been easier. It is very simple to set up an account, to put a posting out, to hire someone, to get them paid. Could not be easier to do.
Well, and thank you. The flip side is that again, to the other question, we talked about the experience for you and that you got value and the 5 or 10 hours is enough. I mean, did you have a chance to hear from the students how the experience was for them? And Jody, since we're on you, we'll stay with you first.
Sure. I'll share a story of one student who wrote to me after the assignment and said that in the past year, he had become disabled, and it was a disability that was going to trouble him the rest of his life. And part of his dealing with it was believing that he would never be able to work. And he was going through, can I be a productive member of society questions? And that the internship gave him confidence that he could actually contribute and that he could work remotely. And it gave him confidence to actually go out and look for a job. So yes, I have heard from the students afterwards. I've heard from every one of them afterwards, but that was one that was really impactful. So speak of being mission driven, feeling really good about what we were able to do with that kid.
Sorry, I have like chills. Thank you for sharing that story. I'm not even sure where to go after hearing that. I guess we have 3 minutes left. I guess I would ask you each just to share sort of any parting thoughts. Though again, not sure how you follow that. Parting thoughts on things you'd want to share with the listeners. Brian, we'll ask you to start.
Sure. So again, thanks everybody for the opportunity. I think you all, in the amount of time that you're going to consider, should I do this, shouldn't I do it? You could already have several micro interns already working on it. So by all means, give it a try. And just remember that it comes down to the individual that you give the green light for. I know that we're trying to keep everything positive and all that, but like, we're not just paid puppy dogs and rainbows smiling and everything is okay sort of thing. I believe that the first micro intern that we had did not work out, totally ghosted on us. And I still don't know what happened. Something could have happened in his life or what, I don't really know. But I could have just been a big pessimist and said, oh, well, Parker Do is terrible because look, this one person didn't do one short assignment. But it made me want to lean into it more because I said, wow, this looks too good to be true. I don't think that the problem is on this. I think it was just the life circumstances of that individual. And we gave it a shot and we've been, just going full guns here.
You've done like 40 or 50 projects, I think.
Easily, right.
And you're a small company.
Right. Absolutely.
Keagan, piece of advice or misconception you heard of or anything else you want to share?
Yeah, so maybe I just say, I've become more and more aware of like my own privilege and probably some of the things that I was doing unconsciously to contribute to that privilege in future generations as I started hiring and giving opportunities to more and more people entering the workforce. And, it's something that I think about a lot. And, I want to be better, right? And, contribute in any way I can to improving kind of, equity and diversity in the workplace. And it's hard, right? It's like really easy. Maybe it's not really easy, but, it's one thing to be thoughtful about it and want to change. But a lot of times it's hard to find ways to take action on the things that you believe in. And like, maybe maybe this is a reflection on me. I was saying this about like Parker Dewey makes it super easy for me to do good.
Right? Well, and it's do good, not as charity.
Right, exactly, and have really good outcomes for my company and my work, right? So it creates these situations where I can feel really good about what I'm doing in the diversity, equity, inclusion field. I can get really good outcomes that help me be and my team be more successful at work, and it's really easy. So I'm just very thankful that I have the opportunity to leverage that, because I'm looking for ways to do it, and I sometimes feel bad that I don't always make the time I should to follow through on some of my beliefs. So I'd just say that.
Thank you. Jody, any parting thoughts or last things you want to share with the group here?
I would suggest to everyone, try an experiment. That's what we did, and we were really happy with the results. That it's easy to do a short-term project. It's easy to create something, a project of something you kind of wanted to do but haven't had the time, or your team doesn't have the time to do. Experiment, try it. I think you'll be really happy with the results.
Yeah, thank you. And again, first of all, I'm still shaken up by that story, Jody, so thank you. No, thank you to all three of you. I mean, just to put real numbers on it, the three of you combined have provided over 100 of these real paid professional opportunities to college students and recent grads from such a broad group of backgrounds, and that's real. I mean, Jody, back to your point at the beginning, unpaid internships are just unfair. They limit opportunity. They limit fairness. They limit equity. We're continuing to see unpaid internships in disguise as other things, whether they're called challenges or virtual programs. So again, huge kudos to all three of you for creating so many of these real paid valuable experiences, and doing so in a way that, back to Keagan's point, is driving both positive business impact, but also positive social impact. Really appreciate everything the three of you are doing. Thank you so much for joining us today for this session. I know I learned a ton. I heard stories that I hadn't heard before from any of you, so thank you. With that, I'll turn it back over to my colleague, Michelle, to wrap us up.
That's all we have. Thanks everyone for attending. We will be sure to send you the link to download that full report, as well as the link to this recording. Thank you again.